Sarah Jenkins walked through the busy hallways of Atlanta General Hospital, her comfortable nursing shoes making soft squeaking sounds against the polished floor. It was another ordinary Tuesday morning in March, but she didn't know that this day would change her life forever. "Nurse Jenkins, we have a new patient in room 205, her supervisor called out. "He's here for physical therapy evaluation. Could you handle the initial assessment?" Sarah nodded, picking up the patient file. As she read through it, her heart felt heavy. Marcus Thompson, age 32, paralyzed from the waist down after a devastating car accident 3 years ago. She had handled many similar cases before, but something about this one made her pause. When she entered room 205, she found a handsome African-American man sitting in his wheelchair, staring out the window. Despite his condition, he sat straight with dignity, and when he turned to look at her, his warm brown eyes sparkled with life. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I'm Sarah Jenkins, your assigned nurse for the physical therapy program," she said with her usual professional smile. "Please, call me Marcus," he replied, his voice deep and friendly. "And you have a beautiful smile, Nurse Jenkins." Sarah felt her cheeks warm up, surprised by his directness. Most patients were usually reserved or even depressed during their first session, but Marcus was different. There was an energy about him that filled the room. As she began the routine assessment, checking his vital signs and mobility range, Marcus kept making small jokes. When she tested his arm strength, he flexed playfully and said, "I might be in a wheelchair, but I still hit the gym. Got to keep the upper body looking good, right?" Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "Well, strong arms will definitely help with your therapy program." They talked while she worked. She learned that he was a software engineer working remotely for a big tech company. He told her about the accident that changed his life, a rainy night, a drunk driver, and a moment that turned his world upside down. "But you know what's interesting?" he said, as Sarah checked his blood pressure. "That accident taught me more about life than all my years walking ever did. It showed me who really cared, what really mattered, and how strong I could be." Sarah found herself drawn to his positive attitude. Most patients she dealt with were still angry at their situation, but Marcus spoke about his disability with acceptance and even humor. The evaluation took longer than usual because they kept talking. Marcus told her about his family, his mother who had moved in to help him after the accident, his younger sister who was in medical school, and his father who had passed away when he was young. "What about you, Nurse Jenkins?" he asked. "Any family stories to share?" Sarah knew she should maintain professional distance, but something about Marcus made her want to open up. She told him about growing up in Atlanta with her 3 siblings, about her parents who ran a small restaurant, and about her dream of becoming a nurse since she was a little girl. "Your parents must be proud," Marcus said softly. "They are?" Sarah smiled. "Though they keep asking when I'm going to give them grandchildren." Marcus laughed. "My mom's the same. She says being in a wheelchair is no excuse for not giving her grandbabies." As the session came to an end, Sarah realized she had spent almost an hour with him, much longer than the usual 30-minute evaluation. She quickly wrote up her notes, recommending him for the hospital's intensive physical therapy program. "So, will you be my regular nurse?" Marcus asked as she prepared to leave. "Yes, I'll be overseeing your therapy sessions 3 times a week," Sarah replied, trying to ignore the small flutter in her heart when he smiled at her response. "Well, then I guess being in a wheelchair just got a little bit better," he said with a wink. Sarah left the room feeling strangely light-hearted. In her 5 years of nursing, she had never met a patient quite like Marcus Thompson. She told herself it was just professional admiration for his positive attitude, but deep down, she knew there was something more. As she walked back to the nurse's station, Sarah didn't realize that this was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would challenge her perceptions, break down her barriers, and eventually lead her to the greatest love story of her life. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to Marcus's therapy sessions more than any other part of her day. She tried to tell herself it was unprofessional to feel this way about a patient, but she couldn't deny the connection growing between them. One Tuesday morning, during their regular session, Marcus noticed Sarah seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" he asked, pausing his arm exercises. "You seem quieter than usual." Sarah hesitated before speaking. "Yesterday, I overheard some other nurses talking. They They were saying it's inappropriate how friendly we are during sessions. Marcus's face grew serious. Does it bother you, what they're saying? What bothers me is that I care what they think, Sarah admitted, adjusting his resistance band. I've never been so comfortable with a patient before, and I don't want to change that. Just then, Sarah's supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, walked into the therapy room. She observed them for a moment before calling Sarah over. Nurse Jenkins, may I speak with you outside? Sarah's heart sank as she followed Mrs. Rodriguez into the hallway. She expected a lecture about professional boundaries, but what her supervisor said surprised her. Sarah, Mr. Thompson's insurance has approved his transfer to Atlanta Rehabilitation Center. They'll be discharged from our care next week. Sarah felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sad because she wouldn't see Marcus regularly anymore, but relieved because he wouldn't be her patient. When she returned to the therapy room, Marcus noticed her changed expression. Bad news. You're being transferred to Atlanta Rehabilitation Center, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice professional. They have better equipment for your condition. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled. Well, that means you won't be my nurse anymore. No, I won't, Sarah replied softly. In that case, Marcus wheeled himself closer to her. Would it be inappropriate if I asked you out to dinner? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Marcus? Look, Sarah, he said, using her first name for the first time, I know what people might think. A black man in a wheelchair dating a nurse who used to care for him. I'm sure some folks will have plenty to say about that, but I haven't felt this way about anyone since before my accident, and I'm pretty sure you feel something too. Sarah looked at the door, making sure no one was around. My family, they might not understand at first. Neither will mine, Marcus chuckled. My mother already has her heart set on me marrying a nice African-American doctor she knows from church. But Sarah, I don't care about what anyone thinks. I care about how I feel when I'm with you. Before Sarah could respond, another patient arrived for their session. She quickly helped Marcus pack up his exercise equipment, her mind racing with thoughts. That evening, as Sarah drove home, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Got your number from my medical file. Hope that's not too creepy. There's a jazz club called Blue Note on Pine Street. They have wheelchair access and amazing food. This Saturday at 7? Marcus. Sarah stared at her phone for a long time. She thought about her family's possible reactions, her coworkers' whispers, and all the challenges they might face. Then she thought about Marcus's smile, his courage, and how he made her feel. Finally, she typed back, I love jazz. Saturday at 7 sounds perfect. That night, Sarah called her best friend Lisa to tell her about Marcus. Lisa was quiet for a moment before speaking. Sarah, are you sure about this? Dating someone with his condition won't be easy. His condition? Sarah felt defensive. Marcus is one of the strongest, most positive people I've ever met. His disability doesn't define him. And what about the fact that he's black? Sarah finished her friend's sentence. Lisa, it's 2024. If people have a problem with interracial relationships, that's their issue, not mine. After hanging up, Sarah stood in front of her mirror, thinking about how her life was about to change. She was breaking several social norms at once, dating a former patient, crossing racial boundaries, and entering a relationship with someone with a disability. But somehow, none of that mattered when she thought about Marcus's smile. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. The Blue Note Jazz Club was dimly lit when Sarah arrived that Saturday evening. Her heart was beating fast as she walked in, wearing a simple blue dress that her sister had helped her pick out. She spotted Marcus right away, sitting at a corner table in his wheelchair, looking handsome in a crisp white shirt. You look beautiful, Marcus said as she approached. His eyes sparkled in the soft light, making Sarah's nervousness melt away. The evening started a bit awkwardly as they adjusted from their nurse-patient relationship to being on a date. But after their appetizers arrived, the conversation began flowing naturally. So, tell me what you do when you're not charming nurses at physical therapy, Sarah teased, taking a sip of her wine. Marcus laughed. Well, I'm actually pretty busy with my software company. After the accident, I started developing apps to help people with disabilities. It keeps me working late most nights. Sarah watched as he explained his latest project, a navigation app specifically designed for wheelchair users. His face lit up when he talked about helping others, and she found herself moving her chair closer to hear him better over the jazz music. "What about your family?" she asked. "How'd they feel about you dating a nurse?" Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "My mom. She's having a hard time understanding. Not because you're white," he quickly added, "but because she's worried you might be with me out of pity. She's very protective since the accident." "And what did you tell her?" Sarah asked softly. "I told her that you're the first person since my accident who makes me forget I'm in a wheelchair," he replied, reaching for her hand across the table. "When I'm with you, I'm just Marcus." Their first date turned into a second, and then a third. Soon, they were seeing each other every weekend. Marcus showed Sarah his home office where he worked, and she was impressed by the sophisticated computer setup he had designed to accommodate his needs. One evening, about 2 months into their relationship, Marcus invited Sarah to dinner at his house. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, would be there. Sarah spent hours getting ready, nervous about making the good impression. When she arrived, the smell of soul food filled the house, and Mrs. Thompson was waiting in the kitchen. "So, you're the nurse who stole my son's heart," Mrs. Thompson said, her face unreadable. "Mom," Marcus warned from his position near the doorway. But Mrs. Thompson wasn't finished. "I need to know something, Sarah. What are your intentions with my son? Because if this is some kind of experiment or, Lord forbid, pity—" "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah interrupted gently, "I fell in love with your son's smile first, his mind second, and his heart most of all. His wheelchair? That's just the thing that gets him from place to place." The kitchen was silent for a moment. Then Mrs. Thompson's stern expression softened, and she pulled Sarah into a tight hug. During dinner, Mrs. Thompson shared embarrassing stories from Marcus's childhood, making them all laugh. By the end of the evening, she was insisting that Sarah call her Mama Ruth. As Sarah was leaving that night, Marcus wheeled himself out to her car. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For making my mom see what I see in you. For not caring about this," he gestured to his wheelchair. "For everything." Sarah leaned down and kissed him, not caring that the neighbors might see. When she pulled back, Marcus was smiling. "I love you," he said simply. Sarah felt her heart swell. "I love you too." As she drove home that night, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. Her family was slowly accepting Marcus, especially after meeting him and seeing how happy he made her. Her coworkers had stopped gossiping, and some had even apologized for their earlier judgment. But most importantly, Sarah had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a love that went beyond physical limitations and social expectations. A love that made her feel stronger, braver, and more alive than ever before. What she didn't know was that Marcus had already started planning something that would change both their lives forever. As she drove away that night, he was on the phone with his doctor, discussing a revolutionary new treatment that could potentially help him walk again. 6 months into their relationship, Marcus started acting mysteriously. He would cancel dates at the last minute, citing work emergencies, and Sarah noticed he was taking more phone calls in private. At first, she tried not to worry, but doubt started creeping into her mind. One evening, while they were watching a movie at his house, Marcus's phone buzzed for the third time. "Another work call?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Something like that," Marcus replied vaguely, wheeling himself to the next room. Sarah sat there, listening to his muffled voice. She heard fragments of the conversation, something about progress and keeping it confidential. When he returned, she couldn't hold back anymore. "Marcus, is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." He reached for her hand, his expression serious. "Sarah, do you trust me?" "Of course I do, but—" "Then trust that everything I'm doing right now is for us," he said, squeezing her hand. "I promise you'll understand soon." The next day was Sarah's day off, and Marcus had planned a picnic in Grant Park. It was their favorite spot, a quiet corner under a big oak tree where they had their third date. Marcus's mother helped pack the food, including her famous sweet potato pie that Sarah loved. As they sat on the blanket, Sarah noticed Marcus seemed nervous. His hands kept fidgeting with something in his pocket. "Remember our first time here?" he asked, looking around at the park. Sarah smiled. "You tried to wheel through the grass and got stuck. I had to push you out." "And you didn't even break a sweat," Marcus laughed. That's when I knew you were strong enough. Strong enough for what? Marcus took a deep breath. Strong enough for this journey with me. He pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket, and Sarah's heart stopped. Sarah Jenkins, he said, his voice trembling slightly, when I had my accident, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would want a man in a wheelchair, that I'd never find love again. Then you walked into my hospital room with that beautiful smile, and everything changed. Tears started forming in Sarah's eyes as Marcus continued. You never saw my wheelchair as a barrier. You saw me, just Marcus. You stood up to your family, your friends, and anyone who doubted us. You pushed me when I got stuck, both literally and figuratively. He opened the box, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. I can't get down on one knee, he said with a small laugh, but I can promise to love you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me? Sarah could barely speak through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, they heard clapping. They looked up to see Mrs. Thompson standing nearby with a camera, capturing the moment. Mama Ruth, Sarah exclaimed. You knew about this? Child, who do you think helped him pick out the ring? Mrs. Thompson said, wiping her own tears. Now come here and give your future mother-in-law a hug. Later that evening, as they celebrated with a small family dinner, Sarah noticed Marcus taking another mysterious phone call, but this time she wasn't worried. She trusted him completely, and whatever secret he was keeping, she knew it was something special. What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus had been accepted into an experimental medical program. For the past month, he had been secretly attending preliminary screenings and evaluations. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that with this new treatment and intensive therapy, he might be able to stand, and possibly even take a few steps, by their wedding day. As Marcus watched Sarah showing her ring to his mother and sister, he smiled to himself. The daily therapy sessions were exhausting, and there was no guarantee the treatment would work. But the thought of surprising Sarah on their wedding day, of standing next to her as they said their vows, made every painful session worth it. What are you smiling about? Sarah asked, coming over to kiss him. Just thinking about our future, Marcus replied, holding her close. And believe me, baby, it's going to be more amazing than you can imagine. Wedding planning took over their lives in the months that followed. Sarah and Marcus decided on a spring ceremony at the historic Peachtree Church, which had recently added wheelchair-accessible ramps. Every weekend was filled with cake tastings, flower selections, and venue visits. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind her back. Marcus was spending more and more time at what he called business meetings, and she often found him exhausted when they met in the evenings. One afternoon, while trying on wedding dresses with her mother and future mother-in-law, Sarah finally voiced her concerns. Does Marcus seem different to you lately, Mama Ruth? She asked, adjusting the white gown she was wearing. Mrs. Thompson quickly looked down at her phone. Different? No, baby. He's just busy with work and wedding preparations. He comes home exhausted every day. Sometimes I see him wincing when he moves his legs, like he's in pain. Sarah turned to face both mothers. I'm worried he might be sick and not telling me. Mrs. Thompson reached for Sarah's hand. Trust your man, child. Marcus loves you more than anything in this world. Whatever's going on, he has his reasons. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Had to cancel our dinner plans. Emergency physical therapy session. Rain check? Sarah showed the message to Mrs. Thompson, who read it with an unreadable expression. Physical therapy? Sarah wondered aloud. He finished his regular sessions months ago. Maybe he's just trying to stay strong for the wedding, her mother suggested, but something in her voice sounded off. Later that week, Sarah was organizing their wedding RSVPs when she found a strange medical document in Marcus's desk drawer. It mentioned something about experimental treatment and mobility restoration, but before she could read more, she heard his wheelchair approaching and quickly put it back. Hey beautiful, Marcus said, wheeling into the room. Found anything interesting? Sarah felt guilty about snooping. Just going through the RSVPs. Marcus, can we talk? Always, he said, though she noticed him shift uncomfortably in his chair. Are you keeping something from me? About your health? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sarah, Do you remember what you said when I proposed? About trusting me? Yes, but... Then please, trust me for just a few more weeks. After the wedding, everything will make sense. He took her hand and kissed it. I promise you, it's nothing bad. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about all the signs, the secret phone calls, the mysterious appointments, the medical document, and his constant exhaustion. Part of her was scared that Marcus was hiding a serious illness, but another part remembered the hope she'd seen in his eyes when he asked her to trust him. The next morning, Sarah went to the hospital where she worked and sought out Dr. Matthews, her old supervisor who had first assigned her to Marcus's case. Dr. Matthews, I need to ask you something, she said, closing his office door. Is there any new treatment for spinal cord injuries that you know of? Something experimental? The doctor looked at her thoughtfully. Sarah, you know I can't discuss patient information. Please, she pleaded. I'm not asking as a nurse. I'm asking as a worried fiancé. Dr. Matthews sighed. All I can say is this. Medical science makes new breakthroughs every day, and sometimes, when you combine those breakthroughs with determination and love, miracles can happen. His cryptic answer gave Sarah both hope and more questions. As she left his office, she made a decision. Whatever Marcus was doing, whatever secret he was keeping, she would trust him. After all, their love story had already defied so many odds. That evening, when Marcus called to apologize for missing another dinner, Sarah simply said, I love you, and I trust you. She could hear the relief and emotion in his voice as he replied, Just wait, baby. Our wedding day is going to be more magical than you can imagine. What Sarah didn't know was that in a private physical therapy center across town, Marcus was holding onto parallel bars, his legs shaking with effort as he attempted his first steps in 3 years, determined to give his bride the surprise of her life. The week before the wedding was a whirlwind of final preparations. Sarah felt like she was floating through each day, between final dress fittings, reviewing seating arrangements, and confirming details with vendors. But what struck her most was Marcus's insistence on following the tradition of not seeing each other the night before the wedding. It's just one night, Marcus said during their last dinner together before the wedding. They were at the Blue Note Jazz Club, where they had their first date. Besides, my mom is very traditional about these things. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Since when do you care about wedding traditions? Trust me, this one is important, he said, his eyes twinkling with that mysterious look she'd grown used to over the past months. Mrs. Thompson had arranged for Marcus to stay at his sister's house, while Sarah would spend the night at the bridal suite of the hotel where the reception would be held. As they said goodbye in the parking lot, Sarah noticed Marcus's hands were trembling slightly. Are you nervous? She asked, leaning down to kiss him. Not about marrying you, he replied with a smile. That's the easiest decision I've ever made. After Marcus left with his mother, Sarah's bridesmaids arrived at the hotel for their traditional pre-wedding sleepover. They had decorated the suite with flowers and photos of Sarah and Marcus's journey together. Look at this one, Lisa, her maid of honor said, pointing to a picture from their engagement day. Who would have thought that the nurse and her patient would end up here? Sarah smiled, remembering that day in the park. Sometimes the best love stories are the unexpected ones. Late that night, after her bridesmaids had fallen asleep, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can't sleep. Too excited about tomorrow. I love you more than you know. Meanwhile, across town at his sister's house, Marcus was in his wheelchair in front of a full-length mirror, practicing with his physical therapist, Dr. Wilson, who had agreed to make this late-night house call. Remember, Dr. Wilson said quietly, supporting Marcus as he struggled to stand, take it slow tomorrow. The braces will help, but don't push too hard. I have to do this, Marcus insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. Sarah deserves her fairy tale moment. In the next room, Mrs. Thompson was on the phone with the wedding coordinator, going over the final details of their surprise. They had secretly rehearsed with the photographer, the videographer, and even the minister. Everything had to be perfect. Back at the hotel, Sarah couldn't sleep either. She walked to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. Her wedding dress hung nearby, catching the city lights. She thought about how far they'd come, from their first meeting in that hospital room to tomorrow, when they would become husband and wife. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a message from Mrs. Thompson. Just checking that you're not peeking at any surprises. Get some sleep, baby girl. Tomorrow will be a day you'll never forget." Sarah smiled at her future mother-in-law's message, but it made her wonder again about all the secrecy. Over the past few months, she caught snippets of conversations, seen mysterious medical bills, and noticed Marcus's increasing absences. But every time she questioned it, both Marcus and his mother had assured her it was all part of making their wedding day special. As she lay in bed, Sarah thought about the medical document she'd found, the one about experimental treatment. Could it be possible? She'd seen enough medical miracles in her nursing career to know that nothing was impossible, but she pushed the thought away, not wanting to get her hopes up. Around midnight, she received one final text from Marcus. "Tomorrow, I'm going to show you that love really can make miracles happen. Sleep well, my beautiful bride." Sarah fell asleep clutching her phone, unaware that across town, Marcus was still practicing with Dr. Wilson, determined to perfect every movement for tomorrow's surprise. His legs were sore, his arms were trembling from the effort, but his heart was full of determination. In just a few hours, their lives would change forever, and this time, it wouldn't be because of an accident or illness. This time, it would be because of love, determination, and a secret that was about to make their wedding day more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Sarah woke up early in her hotel suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids who were already bustling around with makeup kits and hair tools. But before anyone could start the bridal preparations, Mrs. Thompson knocked on the door. "Sarah, honey," she said, holding her phone, "Marcus sent something for you to watch first." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her hands trembled as she took the phone, noticing it was a video message. Her bridesmaids gathered around as she pressed play. Marcus's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "Good morning, my beautiful bride," he began. "By now, you're probably wondering about all the secrets I've been keeping. The mysterious appointments, the canceled dates, the private phone calls." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Sarah, remember the day you walked into my hospital room? You saw past my wheelchair and straight into my heart. You never once made me feel less than whole. But I wanted to give you something special, something that would show you just how much your love has healed me." The video switched to footage of Marcus in a rehabilitation center she'd never seen before. He was between parallel bars, wearing strange mechanical braces on his legs, his face covered in sweat as he struggled to stand. Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth. The bridesmaids watched in stunned silence. For the past 6 months, Marcus's voice continued over the footage. "I've been part of an experimental treatment program. The doctors used a new type of nerve stimulation therapy combined with special braces and intensive physical therapy. They said it might help me stand again, maybe even take a few steps." The video showed multiple clips of Marcus's therapy sessions, and falling, getting back up, practicing over and over. Mrs. Thompson was often in the background, wiping tears and encouraging him. Some days were harder than others. Marcus continued as the video returned to his face. "There were times I wanted to give up, but then I'd think about you, about our wedding day, and I'd find the strength to try one more time." Sarah was crying now, understanding finally dawning on her about all the mysterious behavior. "So today, my love," Marcus said, his own eyes getting wet, "when you walk down that aisle, don't expect to find me in my wheelchair. With the help of some special braces and months of practice, I'm going to stand and wait for you at the altar. It may not be perfect, and I might need some support, but I promised myself that I would look into your eyes at the same level when we say our vows." The video ended with Marcus blowing a kiss to the camera. "See you at the altar, baby. I love you." The hotel room erupted in emotional chaos. The bridesmaids were crying and hugging each other, while Sarah sat in shocked silence, tears streaming down her face. "You knew?" she finally asked Mrs. Thompson. "All this time?" "Of course I knew, baby girl," Mrs. Thompson said, pulling Sarah into a hug. "Who you think drove him to all those therapy sessions? We all wanted this to be a surprise for you." Sarah's mother, who had just arrived, was also in tears. "That's why we insisted on videographers. We couldn't let this moment go undocumented." As the makeup artist worked to fix Sarah's tear-streaked face, her mind was racing with memories. All the clues she'd missed, the medical documents she'd found, Dr. Matthews's cryptic words about medical breakthroughs and miracles. "Is he ready?" She asked Mrs. Thompson anxiously. "Will he be okay?" "That boy has been practicing standing for hours every day," Mrs. Thompson assured her. "He's got his doctor and physical therapist there to help, and those special braces are the latest technology. But mostly, he's got love pushing him forward." As her bridesmaids helped her into her wedding dress, Sarah's hands were shaking with emotion and anticipation. In just a few hours, she would walk down that aisle, and for the first time since they met, Marcus would be standing, waiting for her. The greatest surprise wasn't just that Marcus might stand. It was the depth of love that had driven him to work so hard, to keep this secret, all to give her this magical moment on their wedding day. The Peachtree Church was filled with excited whispers as guests began to arrive. Nobody except the immediate family and wedding party knew about Marcus's surprise. His wheelchair sat empty at the front of the church, a decoy to maintain the secret until the perfect moment. Behind closed doors in a private room, Dr. Wilson and 2 assistants were helping Marcus with his special braces. His legs were shaking, partly from nerves and partly from the effort of standing. "Remember to breathe," Dr. Wilson reminded him. "We practiced this dozens of times." Marcus nodded, gripping the support bars they'd secretly installed. "Nothing is stopping me today. Nothing." Meanwhile, in the bridal suite, Sarah was getting her final touches done. Her white dress flowed perfectly, and her bouquet of red roses matched the flowers decorating the church. Every few minutes, she would glance at her phone, re-watching Marcus's video message. "It's time," Mrs. Thompson announced, entering the room. "Marcus is ready. Are you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The wedding guests settled into their seats. Marcus's empty wheelchair at the altar had drawn some confused looks, but no one dared ask questions. Then, the church doors closed, and something unexpected happened. Marcus's groomsmen rolled the wheelchair away. Behind a partial screen that had been set up, Dr. Wilson and his team helped Marcus into position. He was wearing special braces under his tuxedo pants, and support bars had been cleverly disguised as part of the altar decoration. The wedding music began. As the bridesmaids started their procession, Marcus gripped the hidden bars tightly. His legs trembled, but his face showed pure determination. When the church doors opened for Sarah's entrance, the guests gasped, not just at how beautiful she looked, but because Marcus was standing at the altar. Standing, many people rubbed their eyes, thinking they were seeing things. Sarah appeared in her white dress, her father beside her. When she saw Marcus standing, she stopped mid-step, her hand flying to her mouth. Even though she had seen the video, nothing had prepared her for this moment. Tears streamed down her face as she began walking again. Marcus stood tall, though those closest could see the effort it took. His mother sat in the front row, crying openly, holding onto his sister's hand. When Sarah reached the altar, Marcus managed a small, shaky step toward her. The entire church held its breath. "Hi," he whispered, now eye to eye with her for the first time. "Hi," she whispered back through her tears, reaching out to steady him. The minister began the ceremony, but few guests were paying attention to his words. All eyes were on the miracle unfolding before them, a man who had been told he would never stand again, standing for love. When it came time for the vows, Marcus's voice was strong and clear. "Sarah, when I first met you, I was broken in body but not in spirit. You saw past my wheelchair and into my soul. Today, I stand before you, proving that love truly can work miracles. I promise to spend every day of our lives together showing you the same strength and dedication you've shown me." Sarah could barely speak through her tears, but she managed. "Marcus, you've shown me that nothing is impossible when love is involved. Whether you're sitting or standing, you've always stood tall in my heart. I promise to be your partner, your support, and your best friend for all our days." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus took another shaky step forward. With Dr. Wilson close by, he wrapped his arms around Sarah for their first kiss as a married couple. The church erupted in applause and cheers. For their recessional, Marcus used his wheelchair, yet pushed his body to its limit for those precious moments at the altar. But as they moved down the aisle together, Sarah pushing his chair, both of them had never looked happier. At the reception later, Marcus surprised everyone again by standing for their first dance, holding onto Sarah as they swayed gently to their song. It lasted only a minute, but it was a minute that no one present would ever forget. As they cut their cake and celebrated with their guests, Sarah leaned down to whisper in Marcus's ear, "Thank you for giving me a miracle." Marcus smiled up at her. "You're my miracle first. I just returned the favor." And so ended a wedding day that proved love knows no boundaries, and with enough determination and faith, even the impossible becomes possible.